today. I believe this is our 12th town hall that I've been able to host with the support of my incredible staff. Thanking my chief of staff, Akriti Bambi. Got a lot of other staff who've been helping and taking turns with this. And also I could not do this without the support of CCTV. So thank you, CCTV. Thank all of you, Susan, Sean, and the whole crew that's over there. These continue to be really, I believe we're moving into week 4. And it's a confusing time as we move into a reopening of the economy. And I thought it would be helpful if today I just walked us through what the reopening and the different stages of Massachusetts opening up looks like, from being in a shelter in place to where we are. Before I do that, I want to just acknowledge that as of last night, 95 members of the Cambridge community that we've been able to document so far have passed away from the coronavirus. And to those of you who are suffering loss and are grieving the loss of life, or just the change in life, I want to say that I'm really sorry. This is a really hard time, and I don't even think that many of us can process what this pain really means collectively. I do worry that we will feel this pain more collectively as we move on, and I think it's really important on all of us, and particularly me as a rep and as the chair of the committee in the legislature on mental health and substance use, to be thinking about how do we support and continue to provide opportunities to support this collective grieving that we're all feeling. I also want to say to members of my own community and throughout our state, there's additional grieving that's going on right now. And for members of my community who are African American, Black, or Brown, who continue to experience the loss of life and grieving the loss of life because of police brutality, because of systemic racist systems that have never centered your life, your health, and your well-being. I want to say we need to do better. We've always needed to do better, but to be really clear, many of you have been insisting that we do better, and your advocacy and your pain has not translated into the urgency that it demands. And for that, I promise I will continue to do better as your state representative as well, by listening and ensuring that we seize this moment, we seize this opportunity to start quickly responding with a sense of urgency that your life has always commanded and deserved. So before we go into the opening up, I just want to say I will continue to make that commitment. I will continue to say the names, and some of those names that we've been talking about have been George Floyd, Eric Garner, Aiyana Jones, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice. I also want to say the name of somebody that many of you in this community know, and I knew really well, and that's Uri Stamps. Uri Stamps was one of the elders who raised many of us in Woodrow Wilson Court, whose family had their eyes on us, including his own kids. Uri Stamps was a grandfather of 12 who was killed at the hands of police brutality in Framingham through a no-knock search warrant. And while laying on his stomach, not resisting arrest, he was killed, and he should be here today with his family. So I know that the awakening and the protests that people are taking to the streets today, this is not an awakening for our community members and our neighbors who are Black and Brown, who've been demanding this awakening. I'd like to think it's not my awakening, but I do know that my awakening is that there's no more waiting, there's no more processing, there's no more debating. It's about making sure we are being laser focused on systemic racism that has allowed all of this to occur. And it's the same reasons that disproportionately Black and Brown communities continue to die at a much faster rate to the coronavirus. The disconnect is, it needs to be undone. It's for the very same reasons of what systemic racism looks like, and ultimately really what a society, an economy, an environment, a healthcare system that has been based ultimately in white supremacy. With that, I want to use the time we have here today to focus on the opening up of the economy, answer questions, but invite you to come back next week to join me, as I will have my colleague, who is the chair of the Black and Latino Caucus, talking about the 10-point plan of legislation that my colleagues have been working to fast track. I will be joined by our police commissioner, Branville Bard, whose lived experience and whose life's work has been dedicated to this work of racial justice within law enforcement. And I will also be joined by the executive director for the Northeastern Institute on Race and Justice, whose academic focus and practical focus has been working with police departments and communities of color around the country to do this work. So with that said, I think we will jump straight into questions that people have asked. And I'm going to go straight to Helen Walker. Hi, Helen. You've asked what can be done to get everyone to wear masks inside of the train cars, inside of the T. You've noticed that more people are taking the T now, but also seeing alarmingly a number of people who aren't wearing face masks. And what can we do to insist on that? I will tell you, at the moment, under the guidance, the MBTA cannot force anyone to wear a mask. I know that that is discouraging, but there are exceptions for people who have health issues, and the MBTA is not in a position to confront people, and the guidance doesn't require people to prove that they have health issues. And I think, if anything, what's happening right now with the coronavirus, it's really calling on all of us to start building a kind of trust and a connection that might not have been so evident prior to this. But the social contract is only as good as ensuring everyone is healthy. And as we are seeing in the times of this call to really examine racism in our law enforcement, the social contract is only as good as all of us are safe. And so what I would say to you, Helen, is my hope is that people understand that wearing a mask really is about protecting the other person. And so I'm going to continue to encourage people to please continue wearing your mask. Maybe you don't believe in it. Maybe you don't feel like you should be told what to do. But maybe you can find a reason deep inside to care about another person, somebody who's immunocompromised, who's elderly, or just know that if you can stop someone else from getting sick, that you want to do that. So that is the answer I have at this time. I have another question here from Daniel Schutzberg of Cambridge regarding phase 2 opening. He is saying one of the issues that's not been addressed has been, how do we manage lines outside of our small storefronts, knowing Cambridge and certain parts of our community can be very dense, and there's going to be a time coming very soon now where we start to see a lot of our smaller businesses opening up. I think just go up and down Mass Ave, go up and down Cambridge Street, and you will see this. And I will tell you that the city is not unaware of this, and it really is something for the municipalities to work out. And I'm being told that they are working on this, and they are trying to think through with a lot of our small business owners, who of course want people to be able to come to their stores, to access and to be a customer as safe as possible. They know that if people don't feel safe waiting in line, they're not going to show up. So I will just tell you that they are working on this, and more to be learned. Okay, so Anne, you're asking the question about what can we do to police inappropriate, to respond to inappropriate police behavior. I think what I'm going to invite you to come back next week. This is a much larger question. It's not one answer. I know that the Cambridge City Council is really looking to examine about the best and the highest use of our police budget. And then I know that conversation is taking place around Massachusetts. And I know that my colleagues are leading this conversation. The Black and Latino Caucus are leading the conversation, asking us and other allies in the legislature to really listen and take their lead on where they think the priority needs to be in addressing this behavior and other issues around racial equity. So more to come on that. I will tell you that again, it's not going to be one answer. It's going to be a lot of answers. And my hope is that the timing of this matter and the fact that so many people in the middle of this crisis have refused to stay home and are going out and knowingly risking their lives, because the acknowledgement is that racism is killing disproportionately people of color in the same way that this virus is. The pandemic is racism. The pandemic is coronavirus. And my greatest hope is that the momentum and the insistence for justice, finally, a justice that has never been fully recognized in 400 years in our country, to really deconstruct what white supremacy is and why it's killing people who are Black and brown in our neighborhoods, in our communities, through our healthcare, through our environment, through our policing. I'm really hopeful that in this moment that we are going to quickly find ways to respond to this in a way that, prior to this, took many legislative sessions, took many council budgets to think through and have to debate. But I think we're going to see an urgency in real meaningful change that is honest about where we are. So I look forward to continue being in this conversation with everybody in my community, and to listening and to following leaders of color in Cambridge, in Massachusetts, and fast-tracking bills that speak to the urgency now and also start looking at long-term changes. Next question, why are the Massachusetts testing rates dropping, and what can be done to get them substantially increased? Okay, so what I would say about that question has come up. I think there's lots of different answers. What I can tell you is based on the conversation I've had with Dr. Asad Sayeh from the Cambridge Health Alliance. We were talking about this a few weeks ago, and I think this came up in the news today as well, is that as more people who are fortunate have been bunkering in at home and not going out and really keeping the social distance guidelines in place and wearing masks, we're seeing fewer people, at least in Massachusetts, and certainly in Cambridge, who don't feel that they've been exposed or are sick. We also have testing sites set up around Cambridge, and we've made it available. The Cambridge Health Alliance has actually made universal testing available throughout Cambridge, Revere, Malden, Chelsea, way beyond their service and catchment area, and regardless of whether or not you're a patient. And they have seen a dramatic drop in those who are going out for testing. So I think this is going to be an issue that is going to be ongoing. When do you get tested? What does contact tracing do to help manage who's getting tested and how they're getting tested? And as we continue to open up the economy and we look at daycare centers opening up and we look at schools potentially opening up in some fashion, then there's going to be more conversation about what really is the best public health protocol for testing. And then there'll be more questions about also who's going to continue to cover that cost. I know that the Cambridge Health Alliance has greatly subsidized the state's ability to increase testing, where they have taken on the cost themselves. And remember, this is a safety net, not a for-profit hospital. And so we're going to have to do a lot more questions, I can tell you, are being asked, both on terms of what are the most effective ways to continue to push testing out? How do we continue to use best practices around contact tracing, and the financial implications for testing? So I don't have an answer beyond that, but I would say this will continue to be part of the ongoing evolution in our own understanding of the roles that testing plays in keeping us safe and containing the spread of coronavirus. I'm going to walk people through. I have a series of slides. So if you're watching this, what I thought it would be best to do is my incredible team put together slides of what all the different regulations that have come out from the governor on what reopening looks like in each phase that we're in. So I'm going to take us there right now and walk people through. Okay, so Massachusetts, these are the reopening guidelines, and there's 4 phases that are supposed to last at least 3 weeks. And during those three weeks of each phase opening, there are certain benchmarks that have to be met that are public health benchmarks to make sure that it's still safe to move forward. And in some instances, I want to prepare people, don't be surprised if in fact, we may have to go backwards for a few weeks. The goals of this is to, reopen slowly, methodically, and to make sure that we're also getting used to this new way of navigating around each other and choreographing our moves and the patience that it's going to take. Let's see. So, yep, this is supposed to be determined and informed by public health trends data. And I want to just remind people, don't be surprised if in fact we may have to go back sometimes for a few weeks in order to, again, slow the spread. Let's see. So here we are on the reopening and then fighting COVID, May 18th. So this is where we started, right? So just to bring you back from the very beginning, people have been advised about what it means to have a face covering, to wash hands frequently, to keep distance, and to really be vigilant. And I want to just say that I know people are anxious to get back out in the world. A lot of people are anxious to get back into whether it's, sports, it's clubs that they may belong to, or larger gathering with friends and families. This is the time that often people have to celebrate, to be outside together. But just to remind folks that the virus is the virus, and that's what's going to continue to dictate how we move around each other and how we move forward, or whether or not we have to take a few steps back. Again, reminding everyone is required at this moment to cover their face when they cannot maintain 6 feet of social distance. And talking to people who are epidemiologists, I want to remind people that 6 feet is the minimum to keep that distance. Epidemiologists will tell you it's anywhere between 6 feet, and I've heard anything up to 12 feet to 15 feet. So I'll tell you personally, when we have started to introduce physically distant visits with friends in our life, and I'm far more comfortable when my kids or myself are keeping like 8 feet and 10 feet away. We may have that 6 feet for a little bit, and then I start to get uncomfortable and I try to move back. While it's really important to use sanitizer, everything I read is also that soap and water and that friction tends to be the most important thing that you can do as well. Monitor yourself. If you're not feeling well, don't hesitate to call your primary care person. And that just because we are opening doesn't mean that you still should not be vigilant about sort of how much exposure you choose to have for yourself and your family and your loved ones. Okay, so here we are, phase 1. These are the businesses, essential businesses that were allowed to stay open. Allowed to open on phase 1 were manufacturing, construction, houses of worship, which also have protocols that they have to follow regarding how many people can be in there and distance that has to be kept. Hospitals and community health centers have continued to open. And again, each of those have protocols. May 25th, this is still phase 1, was the more laboratories and life science facilities. This did not include office space. That was on June 1st. But we also know that hair salons and barbershops opened up, pet grooming shops opened up, car washes, recreation and outdoor spaces continue to open up. And other healthcare providers, and then some retail with curbside pickups. This was phase 1, and then on June 1st, Boston offices were allowed to also open up. And we also know that many companies who can allow their employees to stay home have been encouraged to do that. And from a number of people that I've talked to, for businesses that can continue to function with people working from home, they've chosen to do that. So going back to what phase 2 is, which just started this week on June 8th. Phase 2 is going to, again, it'll be 3 weeks of this. The trend so far where we need to be regarding making sure that we have a lower rate of positive test rates, meaning that it's not climbing up. We're not seeing so many more people testing positive. Again, the question that was asked earlier by someone is, that's still hard to assess when testing is actually going down. Hospitalization rate continues to go down, and we continue to expand testing capacity. So all of those things will continue to inform whether or not we can move into the next phase or stay in that phase. So for June 8th, we saw retail stores were opening up, non-emergency childcare and day camps were opening up. Again, I'm reminding you of what's opening up. There's also a lot of regulations about how they can open. And then if you watched the show a couple of weeks ago, you know that the childcare providers continue to struggle. At this time, I've had many conversations with people about what makes sense. Did it make sense to actually say that they could open up without having what I believe is an obligation to have a financial plan? So just because it's opening up doesn't mean that it's easy or people are going to be able to do that. Youth sports and outdoor recreations are opened up. I can tell you I know in Cambridge, there's a lot of debate going on. At least I have some insight to the baseball world, and they're still debating what that means, whether they're interpreting the regulations correctly, and can they do it safely is still to be determined. Again, a lot more in the healthcare space is opening up. Personal services, people who are cleaning and doing photography or tutoring, all of these have more protocols that people have to meet. So step two of the phase 2 will include looking at indoor restaurant seating, close contact personal services, and to name just a few will be nail salons, tanning salons, massage therapy, and personal training. Again, we're still waiting to hear more back from the governor on where we are with that. I am happy to share this with people who want to see this, but these are just more about sort of who can reopen. So banks, as you know, have been open. Dog walkers have been allowed to continue in business. Certain financial services, and under court orders, gun stores are still not allowed to open. In-house services such as babysitting and cleaners, they are allowed. And again, all of these have protocols in place, including open houses for real estate. So if any of these businesses are of interest to you, or you run one of these businesses, it's really important to make sure you understand the guidelines. My office is always available to try to help you get the accurate information, knowing that we're going to continue making sure that we're all working with the same information and the same guidance. All right, so this is just more businesses that can continue to be open: manufacturing, in-home installations, home remodeling, construction. These are all phase 1. Manufacturing, car washes, drive-in movie theaters, hair salons, office space, lab space, libraries with some restrictions about actually it's more curbside pickup. The browsing part of the library, I think we're still waiting to hear that in step 2. And a variety of retail stores. Some of them have been phase 1 curb pickup, and phase 2 will start to move into allowing on a limited basis with guidance about how to move inside on going inside retail stores. And as we can see here, we have casinos, hotels, and restaurants. Hotels and restaurants are part of phase 2. There have been strict guidelines around that, about what can happen in a hotel and what can't. I know that the gaming industry, I think, is meeting either today or tomorrow to talk more about how they would fit into phase 3. And for larger areas of entertainment, theaters, and arenas, that is more phase 3 than phase 4, and we continue to await guidance from the governor on that. Driving schools are being allowed to offer classroom instruction online and behind the wheel training so that they can observe the student driver. That is still part of phase 2. Okay, we just talked about hotels, personal services. Restaurants are still working to hear more about what phase 2 looks like for in dining eating. Amusement parks will be part of phase 3 or 4. Bars will be part of phase 3. Gym, fitness, and studios, phase 3. So we're not there yet, folks. Movie theaters, museums, other venues for theater and culture, all phase 3. And then larger venues like rock concerts and larger sports are phase 4. So I expect we will not be hearing about that for some time. Remember, each phase is at least 3 weeks, and that is if certain metrics are met along the way and stay there. Currently, for recreation and outdoors, beaches, golfs, some parks, to be clear, Cambridge has not opened up its playgrounds at this time. And just to remind folks that once we do open, it's going to really require a lot of trust because the virus is the virus, and we are on the virus's timeline, and as anxious and determined as we are to try to figure out how to get back to some normalcy of life, knowing that it's not going to be normal really until we have a vaccine. We still have an obligation to move around each other and keep each other safe. So again, I think we talked some more about these, but a lot of this is is going to be phase 3, and that's looking at summer camps. Some summer camps are opening, and the record day camps are phase 2. Residential camps are phase 3. My understanding, if you're a Cambridge resident and you've signed up for a Cambridge camp, my understanding so far is that our camps will be virtual for July, with the opportunity of hoping to maybe do something different in August. But pay attention to the City of Cambridge's website, as I believe that's where they're going to have the most updated information. Recreational sports, whether it's indoor batting cages or go-karts, again, that's phase 3. Same thing with various sightseeing businesses, whether it's the duck tours or harbor cruises or whale watching, again, phase 3. And we will continue to keep you informed as we know more. Reopening guidelines in caring for children. I will say that June 8th was where we started this, opening up this phase. And I know many of you have questions, and I can just tell you that I have a lot of questions, and the Speaker of the House has assigned 2 members of our 2 chairs to be working on this, because at this time, we know that the guidelines that were put out really don't make it possible for for a lot of providers to continue to function. And at this time, the costs that they would have to actually incur to make this happen, it's really hard to see how many providers are going to make a living at all. And so if you have questions more about childcare, we're happy to provide you with more information. But I know, and I know the administration knows, there's a lot more work to do to make sure that this can really happen. And we're not there yet. It's happening, and providers are trying, but the kind of resources that we need to provide are still being really laid out right now. Currently, providers are being asked to subsidize the opportunity to open up childcare, and people need childcare in order to get back to work. But I will just tell you that I'll just share with you my thoughts as we move forward with this, and I'm going to go a little bit here into schools, which people are feeling really anxious about. I'm really anxious about as a parent. As we continue to open up the economy, I found it interesting that one of the larger professional associations that represents business interests has been asking for immunity for businesses. And I got to tell you, that just really triggered for me. The first question that I've had is, how are we providing immunity for workers and for parents when parents have to start choosing? Do they believe that the child care option that's available is safe for their child? Will this be a place that they can thrive? Will it do more harm given so many of the changes that take place? Do they need to stay home? And if they stay home, can they stay home and still feed their families? Can they not lose their job? And these are the questions that many parents are going to have moving into the school year. We're hearing a lot about reduction of class size. We're hearing a lot about the physical space that's required in order for school to move forward. What I want to hear more about, and that is why I'm asking questions and looking at legislation, is we need to be guaranteeing parents that if they have to stay home, off 1 week home with their kid while their kid is doing distant learning from home and then going back to school the next week, whatever that rotation looks like, ultimately the questions that businesses should be at the forefront asking is, how are we going to ensure that individuals in the workforce don't lose their economic security and don't have to choose between the safety and the well-being of their children and feeding their children and their children's safety. So I will tell you to stay tuned, as these are questions I'm actively asking and talking about with colleagues and the legislature and the administration. And I'm looking for a lot more answers, and we're putting together some potential, I think some potential answers to that around economic security. Higher education, the same thing. This is going to happen in phases. We know that all of the Harvards, at least here in Cambridge, all of the graduate schools have decided not to come back and to do online learning, while many colleges around Massachusetts are continuing to understand how can they safely bring students together on campus. That's going to be it for my screen share. I'm going to go back to see if there's any more questions here. And we do have more questions. So I'm going to try to go back and make sure I'm getting them. How can we promote potentially asymptomatic individuals getting tested? A lot of people said if you're afraid to go out because they fear they may be infected, but we know asymptomatic carriers are concerning transmission. So this is a really important question, Victoria. Thank you for asking this. What I will say is that we need to do a much better job on informing the public on what kind of testing we're expecting. And while individually right now, if you live in Cambridge or if the other communities that I mentioned earlier, you can go get tested. And I think that's important for individuals to go do that. But there are far more methodical ways and systemic ways of ensuring testing. So when I learned that the Cambridge Health Alliance was going to offer universal testing to anyone in Cambridge, I quickly reached out to the head of our hospital at Cambridge Health Alliance. I reached out to Mike Johnston at the Cambridge Housing Authority and to our city manager and to Claude Jacobs, and we organized a meeting and said, okay, so if we're going to have this universal testing, can we start testing all of our senior buildings, which to Cambridge's credit, they'd already been doing all the nursing homes and congregate housing. They had figured out how to do that when testing still wasn't available widely. And but my concern was if we're going to offer universal testing, there's a whole science around what targeted testing looks like. So we were able to, as a community, test people throughout all of our senior buildings, and then they've started offering testing to people who are living in larger apartment buildings that are owned by the Cambridge Housing Authority. So I think we do need to do more about testing, but we need to understand more about what does effective testing look like and how do we encourage it and how does it give us enough data to start making more decisions. But right now, I would say anyone who is not feeling well and wants to get tested, go get tested. I know there's been a lot of talk about how uncomfortable it is. I will just tell you that I know someone very close to me who went and got tested, and if she can do it, like the rest of us can do this. As I start to come out more into the world and I'm joining my neighbors and calling for justice out in the streets, I'm also looking at and very carefully self-monitoring if I feel anything, although I think I'm very safe in physical distance. I wear my mask covering, but I'm being very conscious of monitoring my own health. And at some point, I just may go get tested just to make sure. The question becomes, most communities in Massachusetts do not have universal testing. So because of the Cambridge Health Alliance, you have access to universal testing that you don't have to pay for. It comes at a great cost for the Cambridge Health Alliance. And prior to them having the ability to do the testing results in-house, they were paying almost 2.5 times more than it costs them now. So the real question for the state is, how often are we going to ask people to get tested? Because that test is only as good as the day that you go, and who is going to continue paying for this testing? So that's a larger conversation that we need to have, and that the insurance companies need to be brought to the table as a part of this conversation as well. Or need to be mandated to do this. So I will tell you that your question is one I think a lot of people have, and don't let the discomfort scare you. And if you feel like you might have been exposed, don't hesitate, go get tested. But what you're asking, I think, is far more methodical about how do we ensure that we really are continuing to test. And I had those questions even for our senior buildings, for our nursing homes, for our public housing homes. How do we make sure that it's not a one and done? Like, what is the proper public health protocol to making sure that this is done routinely? Okay, next question. What should I do if I go to a restaurant or a business and the employees are not wearing masks? Well, the order is really clear that covering, that the face covering is clear in the application for the business. So business, in order to be able to open up and get sign off from the municipality, they have to show that, in fact, everybody who works there will be wearing face coverings. If they do not, what I would do is I encourage you to contact the Cambridge Public Health Department, or if you're not in Cambridge, call your local health department. That's who's responsible for enforcement at this time. And so if they're not, then you call. I had an incident where someone did that and in fact was coughing and yelling, and it was really unsettling. And so I called our local public health department. And again, I want to say that most businesses here, they want to be in business, and they know that Cambridge and Massachusetts is a city that's very serious about public health, science, and medicine, and keeping each other safe through this pandemic. So this is not a state or a community that I think is taking this lightly. But if you find a business that does, call your public health, and they are keeping data. From my understanding, is they are keeping track of businesses around this. And so next question. Okay, sorry, there's a lot popping up here. Should parents be allowing their children to have play dates? Is it safe for them to be within 6 feet? Okay, I want to be clear. I'm not an epidemiologist, right? I'm not an infectious disease specialist. I'm your state rep that's doing a lot of what many of you are doing, and that's I'm reading a lot and I'm talking to professionals. So people have to decide for themselves what feels the safest. What we know is that the public health protocol is that at a minimum, and I want to keep emphasizing that the minimum is 6 feet, right? That all the literature that I've read and people I've talked to is at 6 feet, 12 feet to 15 feet in terms of where these particles of spray, if they have COVID in, can actually float and for how long they can float in the air. And it's different if you're inside versus the outside. And it says, it's not possible. And people should still, let's see, sorry. And I'll tell you that my kids were really clear that when they've had a few physically distant visits, they're not calling them play dates. They're smart, right? They're finding ways to entertain and say hello to each other. But it's definitely not a substitute for a play date. And that's one of the most heartbreaking things for me as a parent, is knowing children fundamentally need to play. They need to play with each other. Often they need to touch each other. They need to touch same things and share and learn how to do that. And that's really hard. You can't play tag with your friend. Thinking about throwing the same ball and touching that. So all I can tell you is that I made the decision a couple of weeks ago. And for those of you who know me personally, you know that we've been taking this very seriously and really careful about not contracting and not spreading the disease. We have a lot of loved ones who, in addition to all of us being vulnerable to this, we have loved ones that would be, the statistics do not bear well for what happened to them if they caught this. So ultimately, I also started to just recognize that after being in the house for 11 weeks, my kids needed to see other kids. And so we have set up blankets, and we keep them about, 10 feet apart. They're allowed to stay on their blanket. And, if they're on their blanket and they're talking, and it's outside, we do not do inside stuff. So they can talk, they can pull their mask down if they're both on their blankets. I personally do not have unsupervised visits. So this is going to be different for just different for kids, whether you have little kids, mine are in elementary school, whether you have high school students. So knowing that every child is different, every age is different, and you have to do what you think is the safest for you and your family. But there's a recognition for me, at least, that the mental health component in this is trying to figure out how to help children still connect beyond a Zoom or a Google Classrooms, because that's not enough either. And that's causing a certain amount of, I think, fatigue and depression, quite frankly. But these are my opinions as a parent, so please keep that in mind when you ask. There has not been guidelines on specifically children having visits. I think that the administration and the public health professionals will tell you the guidelines are the guidelines about mask and social distance, and about being inside versus being outside. I was laid off temporarily due to COVID. I'm now being asked to come back to work, but I'm uncomfortable to do so because of the continued risk of transmission. Can I stay on unemployment? This is a good question, and it's one that we've heard from others as well. It really depends. It depends if suitable work is available, and the unemployment claimant has an obligation to either apply or accept work that's being offered. If you refuse to return to work, and it's reasonable, you have to make that case of what determines reasonable, and they will work with you on whether or not they will qualify you for unemployment. If there's a health situation, if it's the health and safety of a loved one, if the nature of the work actually makes you more susceptible, I would say that these are continue to be some gray areas. And so, but I would definitely say that I would encourage you to apply if you have concerns for your safety, or you have concerns for your health, or there's family circumstances that actually continue to do that. My job as a state representative is to start answering some of these questions so that you don't have to actually try to navigate that gray area. But that as we move through and the reopening of the economy, and we've heard over and over people talking about the second wave of this coming through, whether it's the fall, because more people will be back inside. We're trying to figure out how to continue living our lives and educating our children and paying our bills. So there's going to be lots of reasons why we're going to be more exposed to each other. And also the complacency of what it has meant to see some of a drop and not being that first critical stage. We need to be able to provide real solutions for immigrants in our community who've been disproportionately impacted and who've been denied benefits, even immigrants who pay taxes, who've been cruelly rejected by the federal government. We need to make sure that that people who are afraid to go to work because they're not safe, because they're sick, because they have a loved one who's sick, that they still have a way of protecting themselves, because when they protect themselves, they're protecting all of us. So if human rights did not drive you to think about housing security, food security, environmental security, then the public health crisis that we're facing right now has to be what moves us very quickly to have some real solutions and resources for people. And we're not there yet. So there's some gray area in applying for unemployment and staying on unemployment. It's not clear what that outcome will be for different individuals, but I am working to figure out how do we provide more security for people moving forward, so that people can protect themselves, their children, and also protect each other. All right, more questions here. I thought this was going to be all right. This is great. Great in the sense that more people are chiming in with questions here. So not great that we have to be trying to figure this out. All right. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just trying to read and respond at the same time. If I was already receiving unemployment benefits when COVID started, what will happen when I hit the maximum 26 weeks benefits for unemployment? So just as a reminder for those who don't know, the CARES Act does entitle you to an extra 14 weeks of benefits. You will now be eligible for a total of 39 weeks of benefits. And then people are asking, where do I go if I still need help with food? We're really fortunate, and that Cambridge has done a phenomenal job at working with our partners. Food for Free the City and the Food for Free will merge the Cambridge Community Food Line with Food for Free at the end of this month. So there's a lot of partners who are working on food security in Cambridge and have opened up pantries and are trying to make sure that children and families continue to access safely food over the summer and into the fall. And so if you need more support around accessing food, please don't hesitate to call me. And for you watching this, and if there's any sense of shame, of doubt, I want to say to people, I am so grateful and so proud that I live in a community that when I was a child, I had parents who worked hard. They both had jobs, and yet we still needed to access the food pantry. The shame is in a system, in a country, in a government that actually doesn't give people what they need in order to have basic survival, right? That's the shame. It's not on the individual. So please reach out if you are continue to experience, or are experiencing for the first time food insecurity. Nobody in this country and nobody in this community ever needs to feel hungry or be hungry, and certainly needs to worry about whether or not there's any judgment there. This is a moment where we really have the opportunity to rise to the occasion and not only have a shared sense of values, but let's start turning those values into resources and a cultural shift and where the shame belongs. And it belongs in a system that forces people to have to ask for help, because doing everything that they can do doesn't actually provide them what they need most of the time for their families. So can residents who receive SNAP benefits use their EBT card to buy food online, or do those with SNAP benefits still need to go to the grocery store to use their benefits? That has changed. Massachusetts was able to apply for a waiver. There's a pilot going around the country, so a handful of states were already allowing this. We applied to be part of that pilot, and that is now happening. So you can use your SNAP benefits online. I will continue. Residents with SNAP benefits can use their EBT card to buy food on Amazon and Walmart. And I know that I was on a call this morning with the Food Caucus where they are working on additional ways to be able to make sure that there's more opportunities to buy online. And sorry, this is moving quickly, so I'm reading, and then it kind of, you can see what I see, it's going up and down. Let's see. So the one thing that your SNAP benefits will not cover, and you should know this, is the delivery fees. I also continue to reach out to the Attorney General. The price gouging that certain online businesses have said covers their costs. There's a lot of price gouging on. I've looked at multiple online food services to see the differences, and they all talk about how if you come into their store or their warehouse, the prices are cheaper. So while we are asking people who are more vulnerable because of their health to stay home, we're now making it possible for people to buy online. But we're still saying that if they do that, know that they're going to get far less food than they would if they gone into a grocery store, and that's not okay. So I will continue to work on this with my colleagues and also the Attorney General. Should I apply for traditional unemployment insurance or pandemic unemployment insurance? People traditionally ineligible for the traditional unemployment benefits maybe you're self-employed, you're in the gig economy, you're an independent contractor. Other examples would be those who are earning less than $5,100 last year, or who have not been able to access regular unemployment benefits, either because you were denied or you work for a religious organization. If you're eligible for regular UI benefits, you should apply for regular unemployment insurance. If you don't qualify for regular UI benefits, then you can qualify for what this is, under the pandemic, the PUA benefits. If you have questions about how to apply or where to apply, the City of Cambridge has a website with this up. You also should feel free to email my office, and I think my website should have this up, but certainly we've been putting information out every night in my nightly emails. So I would encourage you to do that as well. And we will continue to connect. People have been calling us, and we are connecting people with these resources and how to do that. Okay, so some of the recent changes that also were made. We are now, the legislature, at least the House, we're waiting for the Senate to take it up, but we did vote on a bill that would allow people to, there'll be some ability to vote in person, but we're also, if this bill passes as it did in the House, you will have your ballot mailed to you. It will have prepaid postage on it, and you will be able to mail your ballot in. And so this is, again, another way of making sure that we're keeping you safe and not exposing to you to lines of people. And we know that one of the most important things that we can do is to not gather when we don't have to. And clearly what was happening in Georgia yesterday was a disgrace. What was really amazing, though, again, as people continued taking to the streets and demanding that we address systemic racism, voter suppression yesterday was alive and well in Georgia, but people were determined to also exercise their rights to vote and to demand to participate in a democratic process and not let that continue to be ripped away from us, as this president has ripped a lot away from us. And we're going to rebuild. And voting is one of the most important tools to do that. And then what we're seeing is voting is not enough, but holding people accountable to make sure that the urgency that you feel is what your elected official feels as well. If you would like more information on that, I'm happy to provide that. I would like to say to those of you who've been tuning in every week, I hope that this has provided an opportunity to share more information. When I decided to do this with my team 3 months ago, as again, this is our 12th week doing this, it was really important to me quickly that every night I send out an email so that you get a brief snapshot of what I've determined. So there's a lot of information out there. For those of you who are on my email list, thank you to everyone who's reached out to say that they appreciate it. But knowing that what goes into that email every night, because we've had people say, I wish you would add this, could you add this? It was important for me to provide an email every night that was very accessible, that was easy on the eyes, that did not overload you visually with too much information, and gave you what I believe is the most relevant information that came out that day. So you'll see in the nightly email that we do, and I do this with the incredible support of my team. It really is a group effort. We look at what's come through the pipeline that day from either local government, state government, public health protocols, and we try to tell you the most relevant data information. I give you some resources of people who are providing essentials, and those essentials are going to our most vulnerable members of our community, our neighbors. There's a lot of information that people would like me to include. I've been asked to include, to remind people that, Sunday's Memorial Drive is open. I'll tell you, I'll remind you, Memorial Drive is open, but I don't put it on my email list because we're trying to really, as much as I can, keep it confined to the most relevant COVID information, and so that it's not a 2-page or a 3-page email. When I have other things that I want to share with you, if you're on the email list, you'll see often you'll get an email from me in the morning, the beginning of the day, that might be something COVID related, but a much more in-depth conversation about that. And so if it's helpful, I hope that you do find that. I believed early on, one of the most important roles that I could play, in addition to advocating and legislating, was to be a place where you could count on information, that you could count on it consistently, that you could feel confident in the information that I was giving you, that it was based in health and fact and science and what was happening in state and local government. And so we will continue to do that as long as we think this still makes sense and that people are reading it and it really is of value and doesn't feel like one more email that you have to open or don't want to open. And I will tell you, for the town meetings, in that same spirit, I believe it was really important to have a space that people who could get on the Zoom call could engage with me and ask questions, not just with me, but I think this is the first one that I've done alone. Normally we have folks who represent sort of what's happening here locally in Cambridge, and then I always try to bring people in who have a statewide point of view so that we can have a conversation that is both very localized, but also giving us insight to what's happening around the state. And so my responsibility as your state representative has been to advocate, to listen, to respond in a number of different ways, but also to make sure that you had really consistent channels for communicating. And some of you I've been told by a number of people, people are watching this just on local cable in Cambridge through CCTV and find it a relief to not actually have to turn on a computer. So I'll say hi, Alice, and hi to my mom and some others who I know are watching this on TV. And for those who've participated through the Zoom, I want to thank you. For those who followed up with emails either before a town meeting or after a town meeting, thank you. And I'll continue doing this as long as I believe, again, it adds a value to the information that's important that I think that you have the opportunity to access and engage with. Next week, I will remind you to join me. The town hall is going to be, instead of 4 o'clock, it's going to be the same day, Wednesday, but at 5 p.m. And we will have a conversation with our police commissioner. We'll have a conversation with my colleague, Representative Carlos Gonzalez out of Springfield, who is the chair of the Black and Latino Caucus, who is really working. I think even as we speak now, he was meeting with leadership in the legislature and has been really pushing with my colleagues in the caucus for legislation to be fast-tracked. So we'll talk about where that is next week. And also I'll be joined by the executive director of the Institute on Race and Justice. And because we talked earlier, her maiden name is Bailey, but it's not, I'm gonna actually pull it up so you know who she is. Sorry, here we go. This is like a lot of information in my head. Okay, sorry, Lisa LaGuerre, some of you may know her. And I've only recently come to know her through this work, and also am appreciating the context of meeting her and her work, working with children on as a clinician as well. So please join us next Wednesday at 5 o'clock. And to members of my community who have really, who've just been working really hard to keep safe, to keep us all safe, and who really understood that also taking to the streets and demanding action in the face of yet another senseless murder of a Black person in our country at the hands of police brutality, who have taken to the streets and understand that the urgency of that is the same urgency of this virus, and the moment and the time is now to face that, and the opportunity. I have to say that, like many of you, I have found this pandemic overwhelming. It's been hard as a mom, hard as someone who wants to do a good job as a legislator. And I have to find myself just taking moments to pause and reflect about how we got here, how do we get out of here, how do we move forward. And there's a lot of grieving going on in our home and outside of our home and throughout our communities. People are grieving for a lot of reasons. And I am also saying that I feel really hopeful that the number of us who are taking to the streets, and partly that's the pandemic, let's be honest, people are taking to the streets. I have to think at least people who are not people of color, they're home, we're home. So people have time, but are motivated to use this time to insist on being part of the solution and insist that today is the day to start responding, not tomorrow, not next week, but today is to figure out what can we do today, where are we today, and where do we need to be 6 weeks, a year, and forever. And so I'm feeling really hopeful that my children and that generations of children are seeing what it looks like to demand that racism and white supremacy be taken as the toxic, hurtful virus that it is, that has systemically plagued our systems for 400 years. And for that, I'm grateful, and I'm also hopeful. And I also know it has come at the expense of a lot of lives being brutally lost and a lot of grieving. So all I can say is I'm thankful. I'm thankful to be part of this community. And I will see you next week, next Wednesday, but a lot of work will be happening with me and my team before we come back to you next week. Thank you to CCTV, as always, for being here and for always understanding how important it is for people to be able to connect and communicate. And thank you to my incredible team who helped put this together as well. Be as well as you can be.